Welcome to another episode of Mazars COVID Talks, a podcast about pandemic resilience aimed at supporting business survival by directing organizations to resources and embedding a culture of preparedness. We're going to be doing things a little differently today, and we're going to continue our discussion with our friends from Becker Legal about the legal impacts of recovery. So for our listeners who were not with us last time, just to give you a quick recap on our guest, we have Anthony Vizzoni, who's the chair of Becker Legal's Business Services Group, and Joseph Harraka, who's a senior partner in the firm's litigation department. So we welcome you guys back, and I say we jump right into it with loan forgiveness.
And I'm going to say that I know, guys, we've been talking about, PPP related, mostly focused in legal, but this is what is key for everyone right now. This is what the listeners really need to hear. So I don't think it's a problem for us to stay in this arena. And I'll just preface before we go into loan forgiveness by letting you guys know, Joe, Anthony, we do intend to have you back very soon because there are a lot of things that we're going to have to continue speaking about. But looking at loan forgiveness, right? What liabilities do employees have if they've been receiving unemployment and are brought back by June 30th and made whole by their employers? Okay. In that case, they're essentially being doubly paid. So additionally, in a case where you make them whole by June 30th, but outside of the 8 weeks, do you also get credit for the amounts paid as if paid within the 8 weeks?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Tashonda. So when an employee it comes back to work, right? So you have the PPP funds and you've been rehired. So you've collected unemployment. You have been compensated for the period that you were not working through unemployment, or at least you're on a list somewhere to be compensated in light of the backlogs that are out there. So it starts fresh based on when you go back to work with your employer. So what some of our clients have been asking is there's a 75% of the payroll, of 75% of the PPP funds must be used for payroll costs, right? So there's a maximum of $100,000 in wages that any employee could earn towards payroll costs. So what we've been seeing is that a lot of employers have been going back and giving hazard pay or maybe prepaying bonuses, right? So to the extent that at the end of the year they were going to pay a bonus, if you're under that $100,000 mark as an employee in annual wages, they'll annualize the wages, they'll put in the bonus, and they'll put in hazard pay, keep it below the $100,000 mark, but eat up the 75%. So this way the employee, they get the benefit of the unemployment, which is okay. They were unemployed for a period of time. And then the employer gets to eat up to 75% by paying them bonus, hazard pay, things along those lines, which are legitimate payroll costs.
Anthony, I have a question though. What happens though in that instance? So there's also the provision or clause that says if you're able to bring employees back, restore your headcount and wages by that June 30th date, then you won't get penalized for any reduction in headcount. And I know they came out with something, another FAQ around that, but more importantly, you would also get a reduction to your forgiveness if that individual's pay decreased when comparing, the 8 weeks of the first quarter, if that amount decreased by more than 25%. So are you saying if they were collecting unemployment, then that would be considered as, and you would get credit for that? So then you're not penalized, or do you still get penalized for the wage reduction there in that instance?
Well, I think if I believe it's FAQ 40, if you go back to the employees and you want to rehire the employee, and the employee says no, I'd rather just stay on unemployment, get my extended benefits. I'm actually there's employees who are earning more money by being on unemployment than they are by going back to the workforce. So in that case, it seems that the language in FAQ 40s indicates that you don't have a penalty. There's no reduction in forgiveness for the headcount for the employee that refuses to come back, and for the wages, right? So the 25% wage reduction shouldn't apply to that employee either. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, I think so. I guess, and to just add to that, so what if the employee did say that they were going to come back, and they came back on say, June 21st? Do I have the obligation, in order to not be penalized for the wage reduction, do I have to pay them 75% of what they would have made during that 8-week period, knowing that they collected unemployment?
I think you have to restore them to their original wages, but only compensate them for the wages for the period that they come back, right? So I don't, there's nothing that indicates that the unemployment benefits need to be taken into account in that calculation.
Okay, understood.
Alisha, it seems like you have an additional thought about this, and I'm wondering if you feel I am.
Yeah, there's just, so much around this, and so much still that's actually still unclear. And, we're seeing, like I said earlier, these FAQs, 1 to 2 of them are coming out now on a daily basis. And, we're just hoping that, a true final interim ruling, comes out soon and provides clarity to some of these open points that we still have today. There's still a lot of ambiguity.
Yeah, it's tricky because the way it reads now, the way the statute reads, it says that you have to restore wages and headcount by June 30th. So clients are asking us, well, if we the last week of June bring on 20 people that were let go, and as of June 30th, they're on our payroll, full-time employees, right? It only applies to full-time employee count. They're on our payroll. And then July 15th, we go back to where we were. We terminate everybody, but we're not penalized now on the loan forgiveness reduction for wages and for headcount, because on that day, on that one day, June 30th, we met the counts. And is that okay? And the way it reads, it is okay, but what you always have to be guided by is you have this 75% requirement. So over the last 8-week period, when you look at the wages, the payroll costs, if you were in compensating people because you didn't have the bodies to pay, you probably didn't meet the 75% requirement. So I think in the eyes of the SBA, the counts aren't too important because you have to meet the 75% payroll cost.
Certainly not very straightforward.
It's not. Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more guidance coming out on this point. So
yeah, more FAQs that that read by saying this replaces FAQ number.
And that's the problem. They change the game rules, right? So by the time these get completed, most people will have gone through their 8-week period, right?
Well, I think with all of that, I wanted to make sure we touch on one thing with you guys, because our country is now moving into phase 1 of reopening businesses. We're seeing it happen, maybe not with a lot of our restaurants and such, but we're trying to get the economy back moving. And we wanted to look at what will the workforce look like post-COVID-19. Now, one of the things I do in the organizational resilience space, or what we're being asked to do right now by a lot of our existing clients, and even there's been new opportunities to develop back to work guidance of some sort. Maybe it's a guidebook or a playbook. Maybe there's trainings. But ultimately, everybody wants to know, what do I need to be thinking about? What does this look like when we go back to work? And is that in the workplace? Is it, going to remain virtual? And then what are the legal aspects or considerations we need to be thinking about when you look at continued social distancing in the workplace? I want to start with that one. And Joe, I'm going to look to you for a second to see what your thoughts are with how this is going to be monitored.
I think the theme has to be a balance between productivity and safety. Employers need to be cognizant of possible risks that they're going to be exposing themselves to lawsuits. I mean, one of the things that is basically percolating out there, Tashonda, as I'm sure you're aware, is that before the next stimulus package is going to be enacted, I think there's going to be a tug of war between the Senate Republicans and the Trump administration on the one hand, and the House Democrats and Senate Democrats and union leaders on the other hand, as to whether or not they're going to be comfortable with imposing any liability shields or protections for employers. I think that the Republicans and the Trump administration are going to want to make any stimulus package conditional on some degree of protections being in place for employers with respect to potential liability, not only to their employees, but to their customers. The pushback's going to be, well, wait a minute, and this is going to be primarily voiced by the Democrats and their constituents, primarily unions. If we provide any type of liability protections and shields, doesn't that send the wrong message? And doesn't that provide disincentives? So that's really the uncertainty that we have, and it's going to be very interesting to see what shakes out. But no matter what shakes out, I think the employers are going to have to use good business judgment to make sure that while they want to basically reinitiate productivity in the workplace, that they put in place sufficient state safety measures. I mean, they should have safety measures in place anyway, and while OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, has resisted calls for safety guidelines to be imposed that would actually provide for fines and penalties, the act itself, its thrust and general duty obligations, provide for employers ensuring, that there's safety in the workplace. And I know I'm going on a monologue, and I apologize, but it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out, because typically the workplace is defined as where people are on a day-to-day basis, and now that's been shifted from not only on site but to where they're actually working. And so it's just going to be an interesting dynamic as to employers having to put in place safety measures, not only in your traditional work environment, but extending beyond that situation.
Thank you, Joe. I mean, all really great points. I'm worried as well, because we've seen this recurring creation of a moral hazard between employees and employers. Of, at first it was, okay, well, if you're not working, there's unemployment here for you. And it's, there's more unemployment available for people who already weren't working, et cetera. And then you tell organizations, hey, here's the money to bring people back. But there's this moral hazard now for, well, I don't want to come back. I'm collecting unemployment and I can stay home. And I feel like we just keep moving in this direction of facing these issues where now we're looking at, well, there's a disadvantage for an employee. I mean, some of the conversations I've had are around, do we want to just pay a company and install software and the hardware, et cetera, the infrastructure to do temperature checks, have everyone opt in on their phone. If it comes up with a bad reading one day, you're told you can't come to the building and you have to go home and quarantine for 2 weeks. When you consider a business that is working in a space where there is a union, how does that work? And I'm glad that in that case, there's protections for the employees. In a situation where there's not, how does this work? And then what are the privacy concerns? I mean, when we're looking at social distancing and we're bringing people back into the workplace, or we're banning people from the workplace for some period of time, I just feel like we are really going down, we're digging a deep hole for liability down the road in conversations we've not even begun to have.
A lot of this really it's going to be taking it a day at a time, Tashonda. I mean, we're really in a novel area. You're talking about privacy concerns, but I think that is going to be overridden by the health and safety concerns for co-employees and for customers. And so I think that you're going to, in some ways, while not have to check all your, privacy rights at the door at the workplace, you're going to have to at least be somewhat flexible in a balancing so that, that you're not a, in quote, hazard or safety hazard to your fellow employees and to customers of that particular business. And you had, mentioned temperature checks and things along those lines, perhaps interviewing them, had they been to a foreign country recently, and things that you wouldn't even imagine asking, other than on a casual, friendly basis, but you would have to be very sensitive as an employer asking and delving into for fears that you're crossing a line that really shouldn't be crossed. I think that the situation is going to enable employers to delve into and conduct themselves in ways that they weren't able to do pre-pandemic, within reasonable limits. We get into those gray areas, though, Tashonda, where,
exactly.
And after conducting a cost-benefit analysis, and if you basically tread too far and push the envelope too far, there could be a backlash, and that's where you're going to incur possible exposure and risks associated with maybe probing too much and engaging in actions where you really didn't need to go that far, and they really weren't justified under the situation. But it's really just a situation where it's hard to predict. And again, you got to balance productivity with safety. And I just think it comes down to being realistic and being reasonable and using, good business practices.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Joe. You have what happens in terms of social distancing. Is that the new norm, right? So once you get back to work, you have there's so many concerns now for an employer that it was bad enough pre-COVID in terms of being an employer in our state of New Jersey. I mean, now you have to address, what do you do in terms of staggering? Do you stagger start times so people aren't coming in together? What do you do with the lunchroom? Are you having, one person sitting at a table? Do all the employees have to keep their doors closed now or wear masks in the office? It's going to be it's going to be a big concern. It's going to be a big topic. I'm talking to some of our clients who are saying, I think working home remotely has been working for us for the past 6-7 weeks. I think we're going to do a lot more of this, right? So why should I pay X dollars a year in rent? I could probably use less space. I'll have people work home remotely. A lot of these issues go away. And even that may open up the door for exposure with respect to these claims that you're hearing now about earnings and wages. And you have people now who are working 12 hours a day. They're having lunch while they're working in their home office or their kitchen table, and they're not getting properly compensated. So I think no matter how you shake or bake it, it's going to be a big dilemma for employers.
It will be. And there's going to be so much more for us to talk about, guys. We have to get into our note on personal preparedness and plan to come back together for more of a discussion. I noticed that, Becker, on your website, you talk a lot about a focus on work-life balance for your employees, which that's a major focus for us here at Mazars USA, and I can appreciate that. But I wanted to hear from you guys. What are you doing on a personal level, just briefly for our listeners, to stay prepared, maybe to give back, to pay it forward, but to survive through this thing for you and your families? What are you doing?
So, Tashonda, from my perspective, I have a lot of discussions with people in our community, with people who are not clients, with family. So everybody's in the same boat. So they're asking, what do you see and what should I be concerned about? What do we do to make this better for our employees? So how do we balance all this? So I just kind of give the benefit of my experiences and what's coming in at work and what we're seeing with our clients. And I like to share that and just give people some guidance as to, our 2 cents worth of where things are going and what they should be preparing for dealing, post-COVID COVID-19?
From my standpoint, I try to draw on my, in quote, trusted business advisor and counselor role that I've taken for clients. And I know that, you guys at Mazars also pride yourself on being trusted business advisors. And what I'm trying to do to translate that into a practical standpoint for family and friends is kind of, explain to them, everything's going to be okay. Here's some practical thoughts. Counsel them on, what actions they can take from an economic standpoint and other standpoints. And rather than play lawyer, I try to basically be somewhat of a counselor and give them practical advice on, what they can do to kind of protect themselves, their interests, their families, and give them a kind of a heads up that, we're navigating this crisis for the first time, but, just look back and understand that, we've always navigated various crises, and, we're going to basically be able to come out of this successfully, and kind of just sensitize them to things that they can do, to make sure that emotionally they can get through this.
I love that. It's one of the biggest things, I think, those of us, and especially you guys with such a specialized skill set, to be able to kind of guide your loved ones through this thing and share that best practice. There's nothing like that. So that's a beautiful thing. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Alisha, I'd love to hear your answer to that question. Maybe you can give us your insight in terms of what you and Mazars are doing.
Yeah, me personally, I have to remind myself to get up and walk around more. I enjoy working from home. I'm actually more productive when I'm home. So even, pre-COVID, I would try to work from home 1 to 2 days a week, depending on, what I had going on. Just because for me, it was a way to get away and put my head down, because when I'm in the office, it's usually back-to-back meetings or client meetings, staff meetings, and I'm usually literally running around the office and, from one meeting to the next, whereas at home, I'm generally able to get more done. However, today, now that I'm not going to any meetings and I'm not going to the office, I'm still having those same meetings, but those meetings are virtually and through Zoom. So instead of running around the office from meeting to meeting, I find I'm sitting in my chair too much, and I need to find ways to remind myself to get up out of my chair, because all of my meetings today are in the same spot. So, walking the dog, trying to get into, a workout routine, trying to remember to go outside. We're opening our pool earlier this year, and trying to stay connected with family and friends, and doing, we try to, with my group of friends at home, we look to have, Zoom meetings on Friday or Saturday nights where we get together for an hour and just catch up and get to see each other's faces. And, in that case, we're actually seeing each other more, and there's more flexibility, than pre-pandemic. So it's, finding ways to stay engaged with the rest of the world.
Love it. There's so many things we can do, right? And Alisha, I will keep encouraging you to take those walks around your house.
I need it. Thank you.
Of course. Well, this has been another great episode. And again, Joe, Anthony, we appreciate you guys so much. We definitely intend to have you back here with us because we have so much more to talk about.
We'd welcome the opportunity, John and Alisha. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you. This was excellent and a lot of fun.
For more information on the topics discussed today, visit us at mazarsusa.com/COVID-19. That's MAZARSUSA.com/COVID-19. Remember, all information shared on Mazars COVID Talks extends from reputable sources. The views expressed here are meant to serve as suggestive guidance based on the knowledge and expertise of the co-hosts and guests. Thank you for joining us.